Welcome to the second floor Duncan Student Center studios. You might think the first week of April, not much to talk about on Shamrock Sports. You'd be wrong. It starts right now.
Hello, I'm Father John Jenkins, President of the University of Notre Dame, and thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.
Shamrock Sports, Austin Rooney, John Horlander, Johnny Soper, preempting the Final Four tonight in Tampa. Notre Dame and UConn again for back-to-back years in the Final Four tonight, around 9:30 or so. So let's start there. The Irish in the Final Four for the 9th time in school history. 2001 and 2018 national champions looking to defend that national title. But they had to get there going through Stanford, a team that had beat them twice in the last 3 years, 2016 and 2017. In the NCAA tournament. Got off to a slow start, but eventually powered through to an 84-68 victory in Chicago.
Yeah, well, Notre Dame was trailing 33-26 at half, and I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, especially having taken this game by 16 points, a 23-point win for Notre Dame in the second half of that game, and it was led by Jackie Young and Enrique Gumawale. Again, it's their stars coming through. We've seen this time and time again. We're seeing it again with this Notre Dame team this year.
Yeah, I mean, that first half just kind of came out of nowhere. Notre Dame just could not hit shots to save their lives. I mean, Marina Mabry, who tends to be lights out from behind the arc, couldn't hit a shot. And the team just didn't look to have the kind of energy that you would expect to see with a trip to the Final Four on the line. I mean, obviously, Enrique Gumawale trying to take over the game early, but Stanford came out swinging, and they came out strong. And I think one of the big factors that kept Notre Dame in this game was they actually got some scoring from their bench. They had a true freshman come off the bench and contribute some points, and alongside, obviously, that's phenomenal starting five. They came in at halftime with a vengeance. They scored the same amount of points in the third quarter as they scored in the entire first half. And I think the most fascinating thing to me was the way that Stanford came out of the half also looking ready to play. They shot 60% from three in the second half. In the entire half, they just looked like they wanted to go home. Notre Dame just throttled them offensively, and it didn't matter how well Stanford shot the ball. They just weren't going to catch up to this fast-paced Irish offense.
Yeah, perimeter defense has been a struggle for the Irish in this tournament, and that might be a weak spot tonight against UConn, who has one of the best, if not the best, three-point shooters in the country in Katie Lou Samuelson. Notre Dame went on an 11-2 run at the end of the third quarter that propelled them into the final period, and there was no looking back, as you said. I mean, they took the life out of Stanford, and they were in Chicago at Wintrust Arena in downtown Chicago, and it was basically a home game like at Purcell Pavilion. Tons of Notre Dame fans there, so they are back to the Final Four.
I'd heard that Notre Dame sent 8 buses of students and local South Bend fans alike to Chicago to support that team. The support that this women's basketball team has had over the years, and I think it's a big reason that they've been so successful, has been the support that this community and that this school has given to that women's basketball team, and they are really reaping the rewards of that championship last year. Muffet McGraw since 2011, 4 finals appearances, a 5th one ending in a national championship, a Final Four in 2013, and now another Final Four in 2019. That is 7 times since 2011 that she has been in the Final Four or better. What a phenomenal job she's done with this team.
You mentioned the fan support here at Notre Dame, and they get a lot of support, especially from the community around campus. This team sells out in nearly every game, and it's not necessarily always the students who are out there supporting, but it's the people who are local to the community who come out, and you see, again, there are more fans that come to these women's games that come to the men's games, and it's entirely thanks to the community around Notre Dame.
Yeah, no question about it. You mentioned Muffet McGraw in her 32nd season as head coach here at Notre Dame, a .769 winning percentage, Naismith Hall of Famer. She has all sorts of decorations under her resume, and she's been in the news this week. She had something to say about the disparity of women basketball coaches in the men's game. Let's take a look.
Comments about hiring practices and what you do in the future. How important, as your career has gone on and we lost past Summit, how seriously do you take being that voice?
Did you know that the Equal Rights Amendment was introduced in 1967 and it still hasn't passed? We need 38 states to agree that discrimination on the basis of sex is unconstitutional. We've had a record number of women running for office and winning, and still we have 23% of the House and 25% of the Senate. I'm getting tired of the novelty of the first female governor of this state, the first female African-American mayor of this city. When is it going to become the norm instead of the exception? How are these young women looking up and seeing someone that looks like them, preparing them for the future? We don't have enough female role models. We don't have enough visible women leaders. We don't have enough women in power. Girls are socialized to know when they come out, gender roles are already set. Men run the world. Men have the power. Men make the decisions. It's always the men that is the stronger one. And when these girls are coming out, who are they looking up to tell them that that's not the way it has to be? And where better to do that than in sports? All these millions of girls that play sports across the country, they could come out every day, and we're teaching them great things about life skills, but wouldn't it be great if we could teach them to watch how women lead? This is a path for you to take to get to the point where in this country, we have 50% of women in power. We have right now, less than 5% of women are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. So yes, when you look at men's basketball and 99% of the jobs go to men, why shouldn't 100 or 99% of the jobs in women's basketball go to women? Maybe it's because we only have 10% women athletic directors in Division I. People hire people who look like them, and that's the problem.
All right, Muffet holding nothing back in that press conference, and there's been a lot written about those comments and talked about those comments, so let's have a discussion here. Your perspective on her comments, not just on women's basketball, men's basketball, but really what's taking place in the country as a whole.
Yeah, and I really respect what Muffet McGraw has done to use the platform that she has at the Final Four media today. All eyes on her and UConn and those 4 teams in the Final Four. And she used that platform to spread that message of that there need to be more women with positions of power, positions of influence. There need to be more women role models for women in college and learning positions. And I think that her efforts to have an all-women coaching staff provides a very useful platform to have women role models for the women's basketball team. I think it's a very important message that she's sending.
Well, I think you're right in a sense. I think that you're right in that the idea that I think it is beneficial for the team to have a women's coaching staff. I think it's important that I think the games are almost separate when you look at men's basketball in comparison to women's basketball, and that they're played with such different styles. I think that there is something to be said to having a women's coaching staff coaching a women's team. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a bad thing to have a men's coaching staff exclusively coaching men's teams and women's coaching staffs coaching women's teams, because I think that there's something to be said for the experience these coaches have in coaching that specific sport, and I think that oftentimes leads that person to be the coach of those specific teams. So I don't want to necessarily say it's a good thing or a bad thing that there are mostly men's coaches in men's basketball, and there should, I think, be mostly women's coaches in women's basketball, whether that's the truth or not.
But it's interesting that the disparity is such that in the 2019 NCAA tournament on the women's side, only 62% of the teams are coached by women. So that means there's 38% or so coached by men. And in the men's tournament, it's 100% of the coaches, assistant or head, are all men. And I think that it's a very important message that Muffet is sending, that while it is relatively common for men to transition into coaching positions in the women's game, it is almost completely unheard of for a woman to transition into a coaching role in the men's game. And I think that what she's doing and the message that she's sending is very important to change the culture around the way that women are viewed with regards to sports jobs. And I think that her being one of the foremost leaders of women in sports, it's an invaluable message that she's sending on a huge stage like the Final Four.
Yeah, she's really started what has become a national conversation about women coaching and coaching men, and just women in general taking positions in leadership across the country. So I commend her for doing that. I agree with you, Austin, though, that I think her comments I agree with her entirely on the idea that women should be given every bit as much consideration as men are in coaching whatever sport it is, whether it's women or men. And frankly, right now, I agree with her. I don't think they are being given the same consideration. But I don't necessarily think that the reasons for that are inherently sexist. I think there are certainly people who are in positions of power who do hold sexist views, and that definitely prohibits women from taking those leadership positions. So I think Muffet makes a good point in that we need to be more mindful as leaders, especially as men, and when we consider women for positions that are typically dominated by men, especially in sports. But at the same time, it's like you say, it's not necessarily a bad thing that men's basketball coaches are coaching men's teams and women's basketball coaches are coaching women's teams, and
because there's not a women's basketball coach out there that has played the men's game,
right.
And I think that's just the reality of the thing, and I agree with you there. But and I think that the message that she's sending is very important, considering who she's facing. And Gino Auriemma, a tenured coach at Connecticut, won 10 national titles since the turn of the century.
Right.
What a phenomenal coach he is, and his message about why there are less women's coaches. 2 years ago, he said that women just don't want to coach, and women are just not interested in working in sports, which is just proven to be not true. And so I think that the way that Muffet has stood up for women and chosen to be a voice of empowering women in sports is very important, as she stands as almost that polar opposite in that rivalry with Gino Auriemma.
No question about it. I mean, those two could not be further apart from one another. Let's talk more about the UConn matchup and the rematch of the Final Four this year. Well, here we go again. Notre Dame and UConn. This has developed into probably the best women's basketball rivalry in the country.
And they're not even in the same conference.
No. How about this? Notre Dame, though, is 12-37 against UConn all time. They have played each other once this season, December 2nd, here on campus at Purcell Pavilion, and UConn won 89-71. Coach Auriemma for UConn called Notre Dame the best team in the country. If Notre Dame's the best team in the country, like he says, UConn gave him a pretty good spanking here at home.
Yeah, and it really came down to freshman Kristen Williams, went off for a career-high 28 points, and Notre Dame just looked lethargic in the second half. That was a slugfest in the first half. It was back and forth, low-scoring defensive battle. And whatever happened at halftime, and it's almost the opposite of what happened against Stanford. Notre Dame came out strong against UConn in December, and then fell off in the second half. They only scored just barely over 20 points. And they're not going to be able to have a half like they had in the first half against Stanford in the Elite Eight. The second half they had against UConn back in Purcell Pavilion in December. They're not going to be able to afford a half like that against UConn, because UConn is going to come at them for all 4 quarters. This is the 8th meeting between these two teams in just Final Fours or championship matchups. That's more than any other team has faced another team in Final Four championships ever.
I want to make 2 points here. I think going back to the initial point that Johnny made, that this is that Notre Dame is 12-37 all time against UConn. It is important to say that this UConn team probably isn't quite the UConn team we've seen in the past. They are a 2 seed, despite the fact that I think that was absurd. They should have been a 1 seed. This is probably still not that UConn team we saw 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when they were the most dominant team in college basketball by a mile. But with that said, I think you're right. I think Notre Dame's going to have to show up in a big way, more so than they did against Stanford. They're going to need players like Marina Mabry to score the basketball. She has a total of 12 points in this NCAA tournament. During the regular season, she averaged 12.5 points per game. So we're going to have to see her actually put the ball in the basket a few times and help the rest of the stars around this team contribute offensively. And she's picked it up rebounding and with her assists, but I am very surprised to see the lack of production scoring-wise from Marina Mabry so far.
And we talked about earlier the struggles the Irish have had defending the perimeter. Katie Lou Samuelson, who averages 18.5 per game, the senior for UConn, scored 29 in the Elite Eight against Louisville in UConn's 80-73 victory. And she's been having some back issues. It didn't seem to matter in the game against Louisville in their 7-point win. But here's a problem spot for the Irish, defending the perimeter, and you have to think UConn's going to try and jump on that right away. How do the Irish win this game?
I think that they come at it with a ton of energy. You got Jackie Young, Arike Gumball. These are some of the most athletic players in the country, and they're going to have to come out high energy, disrupting play early. Don't let UConn get easy shots. Don't let them get some rhythm by moving the basketball around, because Notre Dame's got some size down low. Jess Shepard and Brianna Turner can really hold it down with regards to rebounding. So they're going to have to disrupt play out on the perimeter, making sure that UConn doesn't get easy shots, because if they try to beat Notre Dame down inside, I don't think they're going to be very successful. So if Notre Dame can disrupt play on the outside, get some steals, get this game in transition, then Jackie Young and Arike Ogunbowale can really get some fast break layups and get Notre Dame out to a substantial lead before UConn really has a chance to shoot the ball very heavily.
I think you're generally right. I think that Notre Dame has to get their entire Big Five going. Jackie Young, Agumbawale, Shepard, Turner, and specifically Mabry scoring the basketball. If they get the 5 of them going, it's going to be tough for a team like UConn to play well. Also, Notre Dame's got to shut down Collier. She has 21 points a game. She averages more than 10 rebounds a game. The question is, can Notre Dame can Notre Dame beat UConn on the glass? They've got, of course, Turner and Shepard, who have done a great job rebounding this season. Can they keep it up down the stretch?
Yeah, you mentioned the 2 seed for UConn, how they were disappointed about that. It was considered a down year for Connecticut. They were 31-2. And if that's a down year, I would take that.
They have 16 losses in the last 10 years. 8 of them have come to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So if there's a team that can beat UConn again, it's definitely going to be Notre Dame. It's the 50th meeting between Gino Auriemma and Muffet McGraw, a rivalry that spans sports. I mean, this is a cold-blooded hatred that these two coaches have for each other, and they're going to be going at each other's throats come tonight.
And I can't wait to watch it. It'll take place 30 minutes after the conclusion of the first Final Four game, which is Baylor and Oregon, starting at 7 o'clock on ESPN in Tampa. All right, let's talk about what's going on the men's side of things. Final Four in Minneapolis this weekend. Michigan State and Texas Tech, the 2 and 3 seeds, and then Virginia and Auburn, the lone Cinderella, if you want to call them a Cinderella. They're a 5 seed.
Not really.
I would agree with that. They won the SEC tournament, and how about that story with Bruce Pearl? But here's what you get when you don't have Cinderellas in the NCAA tournament. You get really good matchups, and I think this Final Four has really good matchups. You have compelling storylines, great head coaches, and Texas Tech, a team making their first ever trip to the Final Four.
Well, you make a point that, you get compelling matchups. I'd much rather see a team like Loyola Chicago playing in this Final Four. I think that's just much more compelling, much more interesting for me to watch a team that, isn't normally covered and is a, small conference team that's been outstanding all season long and competing against these big-time and Power 5 schools and, making a name for themselves. And I think that was something that was really interesting for me to watch last season in Loyola Chicago. Interesting note on Auburn here, the lone Cinderella, as you called them, Johnny. They almost lost first round in New Mexico State. That was a one-point win for them, and there were 3 free throws at the end of the game for New Mexico State. If they sunk all 3 of those free throws, New Mexico State would have moved on. Auburn wouldn't be in the Final Four right now. So again, those 12-5 matchups are always fun to watch, and I would have rather seen a team like New Mexico State and knock off Auburn and then gone all the way to the Final Four and see them. But nonetheless, I think you're right. It should be an interesting storyline. I think UVA still should be the favorite to win at this point. I had them winning my bracket from all the way in the beginning, and I think that they've lived up to that for the most part. They had some tough first 2-round matchups, but for the most part, they played pretty well. Yeah,
and I think that just speaks to the fragility of March Madness, where Auburn was on the precipice of getting knocked out in the first round to a team in New Mexico State that they should have had no trouble with. Right. And then they turn around and beat North Carolina by 20 points and really handled Kentucky pretty well in the Elite Eight, and now they're moving on to face a Virginia team who lost in the first round last year, who's come back to make the Final Four. What a great storyline that is.
I would like to say, I don't want to count New Mexico State as a team they should have beaten easily. That was a team with 30-plus wins on the season. I always love those 12-5 matches because you never know what's going to happen.
Yep.
So I never would call that a game that the 5 seed should win. I would barely even call it an upset at this point because they win probably 40% of the time.
Well, and you had a team like Auburn who was coming into that game after having won the SEC championship. They had to play 4 straight days, and then they had to get on a plane and travel, and so all of that factored in probably to what was not the most impressive first-round performance. But outside of that, I mean, you mentioned the game against North Carolina. I mean, they looked incredibly good. And North Carolina was a team that so many people had, at least in the Final Four, and most people had in the championship game. This was a really good North Carolina team. We haven't even mentioned Duke, who lost to Michigan State by a point. And Paul Farrington on last week's show talked about some of the issues that he thought might come up with Duke, and he thought they relied too much on Barrett and Zion Williamson. But down goes the Duke team that everyone was so enthralled by this season. And I'll be honest, it's kind of unfortunate that we couldn't watch them compete in the Final Four this year, especially a star talent like Zion Williamson.
Yeah, but it is nice that people aren't talking about them anymore because now the light can be shed to people like Cassius Winston and this Michigan State team. Very well coached under Tom Izzo. What a great team that they have, and the way that they beat Duke, just out-muscling them, in a team that you thought really couldn't be out-muscled.
Right.
So I think that's my favorite matchup of the Final Four is Michigan State, Texas Tech. Those are some really, really good teams that are going to go at it. And Virginia, a very good defensive team against an Auburn team that likes to shoot the heck out of the ball. That's going to be an exciting game. I agree with you, Johnny. No Cinderellas does mean more compelling matchups games you think are just going to be slugfest between two elite basketball programs. Two teams have never made the Final Four, Auburn and Texas Tech, also with a chance to earn a berth to a national championship game.
I think that despite the fact Auburn is the lowest seed here, I think a team that probably even fewer people expected to make the Final Four than Auburn was Texas Tech, and here they are playing Michigan State to go to the finals. I didn't have them in my bracket. I know a lot of people didn't have them in, going to the Final Four, despite the fact that I think a lot of people did not have Gonzaga from that region winning. There were some people who had some of the other teams. I think I had Buffalo from that region making it all the way to the Final Four. But it ends up being Texas Tech, who had an outstanding year. And now here they find themselves as a 3 seed in the Final Four. So it should be a good one.
Yeah, all right, real quickly, pick the games.
I'm going to go with Texas Tech suffocating on defense. They're going to move on to the title game. And I think Virginia's just going to be too much for Auburn. I think that team is just so well coached under Tony Bennett. And he's finally made a Final Four in his coaching career. Virginia, I think he's going to make a title game. Texas Tech, I think they're going to fall short. I think Virginia's going to be the national title winner.
I hate to do this, but I have the exact same picks you got, John. So I actually had Virginia
This is
winning
the first time in Shamrock sports history
we've
that
ever
Austin
agreed.
Rooney and John Horlander ever agreed with each other.
Well,
Continue.
I had Virginia winning it all in my bracket, so I have to have Virginia winning, and I've got Texas Tech. I think they're going to take down Michigan State and fall short against a really good Virginia team.
All right, some coaching carousel news happening, especially at Virginia Tech. That really is the most notable one. Buzz Williams deciding to go to the SEC, Texas A&M, after spending a good amount of time in Blacksburg, really turning around that Virginia Tech basketball program. There still does remain, however, an open position in Los Angeles at one of the great programs in college basketball history, UCLA, who tried to nab John Calipari from Kentucky. And Coach Cal very smartly used that as leverage with Kentucky and was able to pan out a lifetime contract.
I love that deal from Coach Cal. I think that the UCLA job is the most desirable job in basketball right now for any coach. But I do think that if you're at a team like Kentucky, or if you're Tony Bennett at Virginia, or if you're at any sort of established blue blood basketball program, you have absolutely no incentive to leave and go to UCLA, where it will be at least a 1 or 2 year rebuilding project. UCLA is always going to get good recruits, but it will be a rebuilding project to get UCLA back to the point where they want to be, or where you would want to be if you're the coach of UCLA. And so I think that is a very smart move by Coach Cal to use that as leverage, knowing that's a desirable job, and get a lifetime deal from Kentucky. He's been so successful there, despite only winning just 1 national title. I think that he is one of the best coaches in the country, especially come tournament time, and the best at developing young players. Yeah. And so I'm very excited to see him continue that work at Kentucky. But as far as the Buzz Williams deal goes, I don't understand that move other than from a financial standpoint, because I feel like Virginia Tech, ACC, he's
it's a better basketball conference in the SEC.
He's right up there competing with the best of the best. I mean, they were right there with Duke and North Carolina this year for a little bit. It seems like a lateral move, maybe even a downward move for him to go to the SEC and Texas A&M.
I totally agree with you. I did not quite understand the move for Buzz Williams to go to Texas A&M here. This is a Texas A&M basketball program. It's okay, but they don't have great history. This is not like he's moving from Virginia Tech to one of the top teams in college basketball, as if he, let's say Calipari were to go theoretically to UCLA and he took the job at UCLA or something. Or sorry, he took the job at Kentucky at a premier SEC school. This Texas A&M team is sort of mediocre, so I'm not quite sure I understand the move from Buzz Williams. As far as the UCLA job, I think that the desirability of the UCLA job, if you go back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is different than the desirability today, because this UCLA team has not had that same
It's different
success.
in that it's better, right?
No. Not even close, buddy.
Johnny hasn't slept in like 2 weeks. He
Listen,
just stays up thinking about
before
the
you
UCLA
finish your point,
job.
you might be right that UCLA is a much better team, like when they went to 3 straight Final Fours from 06 to 08 under Ben Howland. But here's the difference between then and now. The facilities on campus at UCLA have drastically improved. They have a renovated Pauley Pavilion. They just opened up a brand new practice facility for the men's team and women's team on campus.
But success matters. Success matters
no question.
A lot. There's a reason that everyone goes to Duke and everybody goes to UNC and Kentucky, because these teams have success year in and year out. And if you're a UCLA team that's sort of struggled to an extent over the last decade, well, a lot of players have been like, well, they may have been a big name in history. Maybe there's a lot of history behind that program, dating all the way back, a half century ago. But this is not something that I'm still interested in today, because there are better options for my career out there.
That may be true, but whoever gets that job has a hotbed of recruiting talent right in their backyard.
Yep.
Southern California in general, has a ton of basketball talent, star talent. And their first job, item number 1, has got to be get those kids to come to UCLA. And if they do that, I think UCLA turns the thing around. Jamie Dixon, the TCU head coach, being floated for the UCLA position. Mick Cronin at Cincinnati. These are names that I don't think make a big enough splash for the Bruins. I think it was foolish of the administration to think that they could have taken John Calipari away from Kentucky. You don't go from blue blood to blue blood. You just don't, especially when you've had the kind of success that Coach Cal has had at Kentucky. So it remains to be seen how the Bruins are able to fill that vacancy. When Ben Howland left and they hired Steve Alford, nobody really cared. Didn't really make a big splash because Alford came from New Mexico. So they're going to have to make some sort of splash to get the alums and the fans in Westwood happy. All right, as we wrap up the show here in the last 5 minutes, let's talk about some of the other sports that are happening around campus here at Notre Dame. And we'll start with the women's lacrosse team, who had a big win over the weekend against top 5 North Carolina team, a 9-7 win, but then had a tough turnaround and had to take on Boston College, the number 1 team in the country, on Wednesday.
That's a brutal gauntlet of a schedule, too,
is.
to go from North Carolina and then travel to Chestnut Hill to take on Boston College. But I think that the games are going to be decided for this Notre Dame women's lacrosse team on the defensive end. You got the all-time saves leader in Sam Jackalone, and that defensive unit is so strong. And I think that is where Notre Dame is going to win their games, and that's how they're going to maintain success here as a top 10 lacrosse program. Sammy Lynch and Maddie Howe are going to be able to score goals, and Notre Dame is going to get the goal support that they need. But I think the games are won and lost in the defensive end of the field for Notre Dame.
Yeah, well, Samantha Jackalone last week won the Inside Women's Lacrosse Player of the Week, and it was with good reason. She made 8 consecutive saves at one point in that game against UNC, had 14 overall on the game. You know, those are some outstanding numbers from Samantha Jackalone, and she has led this Notre Dame team in large part, along with the likes of Andy Aldave and Maddie Howe, who have also put up really, really big numbers offensively. So this team is led by a lot of really good talent. I could see them making a push late in this season, getting far in that NCAA tournament.
Just the second loss on the season for the Fighting Irish on Wednesday at Boston College. They fell 9-13 to the Eagles, but have positioned themselves really well for the rest of ACC play and for the NCAA tournament. All right, let's move on to the baseball team. Tough start to the season. They had to go on the road against Arizona State, their first series of the year. One of the best teams in college baseball, a blue blood in the Pac-12. They're 11-15 overall, but they haven't played bad in ACC play.
No.
They're 6-6 in ACC play and picked up a few big series wins against Wake Forest and Clemson, both on the road.
You make a really good point, because this has been 2 separate seasons for Notre Dame. It's been the season against out-of-conference teams like Ball State and Central Michigan, which we saw on Tuesday, a 17-5 loss, and it's been the in-conference series, games against Clemson and those guys who Notre Dame's been able to knock off. They won a game versus Florida State. They also picked up a game versus Georgia Tech and almost won 2 of 3 versus both Florida State and Georgia Tech. Could have easily done that. They fell apart late in the game, so we'll have to see how they do this weekend against Virginia. Talented Virginia team. They got Tanner Morris at the top of their lineup, Cam Simmons in the middle of the lineup. This is a good UVA team. We'll have to see what happens this weekend.
Softball team 21-12 overall and 4-5 in the ACC. They're in the middle of that Atlantic Division, and they have a big series coming up against Boston College, who has not been playing that well. A Boston College softball team that has been very good in the past 3 seasons in the ACC, but not that great this year, toward the bottom of the pack. So a chance for the Fighting Irish to pick up a series win, perhaps even a sweep, to improve their ACC record.
And you'll be on the call for that one, won't you, John?
I will be tonight at Melissa Cook Stadium, a 5 p.m. start for the Notre Dame softball team, who is seeking another NCAA tournament appearance under Deanna Gumpf. All right.
I'd like to make a quick in
Sure.
memoriam.
Go ahead.
2 things. First of all, the Alliance for American Football, rest in peace. I was your biggest fan.
The Hot Shots.
Your only fan.
And another biggest fan that we have here on the show.
That's right.
Austin Rooney, biggest fan of the hockey team. In memoriam for the hockey team. Tough loss to UMass in the NCAA men's hockey tournament.
Yeah, well, they had a good game against Clarkson. They had a game-tying goal from Bobby Nardella, a great pass from Cal Burke to set it up, and then Cam Morrison had the game winner. But then UMass, my gosh, that
suffocated them.
They did. That's a team that has way more speed than Notre Dame. They're just a far more talented team. It's unfortunate as well because Andrew Peak, who was the team's captain, started defenseman. It was sort of expected, but he has signed with the Columbus Blue Jackets, 2nd-round pick from 3 years back. So,
And Bobby Nardella signs with the Washington Capitals.
There you go. Was that today?
That was today.
All right.
Breaking
I
news.
checked yesterday, and I saw you hadn't signed it. So there you go.
2-year
You had that
contract
on me.
with the Caps. All right, real quick, who wins tonight, Notre Dame and UConn?
Irish by 90.
By 90.
I have Notre Dame by 10.
And do they win the national title? I assume
80,
you both
70,
think
yes,
they're playing Baylor?
Yes.
I got UConn. I'm sorry, I got Oregon.
Oregon's
Notre
gonna
Dame
beat
against
Baylor.
Oregon.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a real good game.
All right, we'll see. That is tonight around 9:30 or so on ESPN. Thanks for watching Shamrock Sports, everyone. Have a great weekend.